Hello, you're watching World Talks on TVP World. My name is Sasha Farbach. Finland is investigating another suspected violation of its airspace by a Russian aircraft, which occurred on Thursday, the third such suspected incident since May, just as Nordic leaders are pushing for closer security and defense cooperation. Now, their meeting in Copenhagen on Thursday put Russia, the Arctic and the security of the North Atlantic firmly on the agenda. Joining us now is Jakob Hallgren, director of the Swedish Institute of International Affairs. Good to have you with us. Welcome.
Thank you for the invitation.
I want to start with the most recent violation here that we're looking at by a Russian plane into Finnish airspace. I mean, it doesn't appear to be the first one. Actually, just wanted to ask you, do you see a pattern emerging here? Is this Russia testing the alliance in any way, and what to do about it?
Oh, it's absolutely a pattern. I mean, it's a long-standing pattern that the Russians are testing our boundaries and our systems and our resilience. And we've learned it the hard way that we need to be able to react swiftly, but also robustly and in a calm way to just show them where the boundaries are. And they have usually abided to that or adapted to that in the past. But it's absolutely a recurrent pattern to try to test us and to test essentially the readiness of the alliance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I suppose, I don't know, do you think that this was perhaps connected with the timing? And we've had this Nordic Council meeting in Copenhagen Thursday. We had this violation on Thursday. Mm. Was there timing a factor in this at all? Is that a sign from Russia, or is that just coincidence?
Could be, but I would probably opt for that this was more a coincidence, because these flight incursions are unfortunately happening fairly often over the Baltic Sea, in the Baltic countries. I'm sure you've seen some of it as well from Belarus. So that happens all the time, and it's part of a bigger pattern of, shall we call it, hybrid testing and direct kinetic testing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you mentioned Belarus. I want to get to that in a moment because it's an interesting question there. But let's look at this meeting of Nordic prime ministers in Copenhagen. I mean, symbolically, of course, that does send a message. But what can we expect, or what do you recommend, at least, hopefully, what will come out of such a meeting, practically, tangibly, after they've all come together?
Well, this is part of a series of meetings and part of a set of different important formats in our region. I mean, the Nordic Five are very close. They've been so throughout history. The Nordic Council of Meetings has existed since the 1950s. Then this has then been complemented with the NB8 format, and then, of course, all of the close collaboration with Poland and with Germany, etc., in Council of Baltic Sea States and other forums. So this is a way for the five Nordic countries to show unity and to show concretely that the Nordic country has become a bit more of a strategically coherent actor that certainly takes all of the challenges in our region in a much more serious way. And when I say our region, it's not only the Baltic Sea, but it's also directly interconnected with the High North and the Arctic, and then of course wider allied security with the war in Ukraine as a backdrop as well.
Yeah. And unfortunately, we have seen more incidents. If it isn't planes testing airspace, it's also drones crashing. It's missiles falling, if that's looking at the Nordic, or rather more the Baltic states, but also increasing what's happened also overnight in more south, in the Black Sea region of Romania. And also, I just want to get your sense of this most recent incursion of this Russian drone that's crashed overnight into Friday into the border there between Ukraine and Moldova. Again, accident, or what lessons do we draw from that that we could apply maybe to the Nordics and across the alliance?
Well, it's of course difficult to say from afar whether it was a miscalculation or a mistake, or whether it was conscious. However, you can never exclude that it is conscious and that it's part of a bigger pattern of testing our resilience. And the obvious conclusion for us is, of course, to build and rebuild and improve our defenses, our readiness, and our resilience to firmly just show the Russians that this is not acceptable behavior. I mean, we've seen this in all of the countries bordering Russia, which just goes to show that this is a conscious long-term strategy to try to test us, to undermine us. I mean, the flight incursions by drones is one very concrete example, but I mean, going to the whole hybrid toolbox, there's many ways in which they are trying to test our resolve and our unity, if I put it that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and testing as well. I mean, at the same time, you still have this gray zone, but nevertheless, you have recently, if we look at what's happening also in the Baltic states with more legal migration, very much orchestrated from Lukashenko in Minsk. Now, Minsk, that was my question to you as well. Apparently, news is that in Finland, the embassy there of Belarus will be closing. That leaves, I believe, only Sweden with actually an embassy of Belarus. So I asked the question, why the closure, if you can tell us, or what it means, and why Sweden retains the only one?
Well, actually, I don't know the details of this, but it's obvious that Belarus is acting in a highly unconstructive way, and as always, this is a signal then that if they have behaved in ways which are not reliable, even though we've had a lot of contact with them, the only way out is to close. However, there's of course always a risk to fully close all channels. This is why we are at low level and with very strict parameters Russian embassies open, but that's always a difficult balance to strike, because if you close all of the diplomatic channels, that could also bear its negative consequences. But that is not to say you shouldn't be very firm in responding to and clarifying for, in this case, the Belarusian authorities when they have been responsible obviously for unacceptable behavior, instrumentalizing migration, for instance, as you said, but there are of course other examples as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also about cooperation. I mean, I just kind of stretched the geography a little bit. I know that, for instance, Sweden has deployed, I believe, several hundred, maybe up to 500 troops in Latvia as a new NATO member, actually just with Finland, just a few years really membership. But then also looking at the High North. I mean, tell us a bit more about the concentration now, the focus on the Arctic, the dangers there, vulnerabilities, and what that means for all this Nordic cooperation.
Well, from a Swedish perspective, if that is what you're asking me, the membership of NATO was, of course, a sea change in our strategic thinking, because going from a non-aligned posture where our national borders were the limit, it's now the borders of the alliance which is the focus, which means that we are looking at both the Baltic, and as I said before, the link between the Baltic and the High North and the Arctic in whole new ways. We realize that in order to defend every inch of the alliance, we need to, as one of the bigger actors in the Nordic region, have to take that much more seriously. So, for instance, Sweden recently acquired 4 frigates. It's the first time in like 60 or 70 years that Sweden have blue water going frigates, and the U.S. President Trump's overtures towards Greenland has, of course, not helped either. And that's where the Nordic loyalty and solidarity come in. So you might remember how the Nordic countries actually sent troops, not albeit in small numbers, but when some of the threats came from the American side. So we realized that this is an area that we need to take much more seriously. And taking it seriously means that you need to also allocate the resources and the capabilities to show that we can to defend that area together, or essentially deter Russia, or for that matter, China, or other adversaries to protect that area. So it represents a whole new thinking for Sweden, and I believe Finland as well. Now, as a second thing, if I may, the Nordic area, or the Arctic area, and the High Nord area is, of course, a vast maritime space. But for Finland and Sweden and Norway, it also represents a land domain. I mean, this is just neighboring the Kola Peninsula with the Russian second strike nuclear capability, some of their most precious assets, which means that in the land, domain or dimension, Sweden is now actually the host nation of the forward troops in northern Finland, which is a whole new development as well, where the alliance together is defending and deterring Russia from any adventures there. So it's not only a maritime issue; it's also very much a land domain issue, which we need to take much more seriously as the people who are essentially living there.
Mm-hmm. Right, and interesting line you use there, a new way of thinking. Very much, I think, the operative mind right now on many policymakers from the High North to the Baltic and Europe. Look, thanks so much for that. Really appreciate that. That was Jakob Hallgren there, Director of Swedish Institute of International Affairs. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us here on World Talks, but stay right here on TVP World for more news and commentary. Goodbye.